2 of section 2.1, and we are going to look at some other conditional statements, some other related conditional statements. And so as a reminder, remember we talked about a conditional statement being if P then Q. So it has the if and then. P is our hypothesis, Q is our conclusion. And then we also talked about yesterday the converse. So for the converse, we switch the hypothesis and conclusion. And so it's like if Q, then P. So two other related conditional statements are the inverse. So here we're going to underline all of these titles. So the inverse, notice, kind of relates back to the conditional statement. It's P then Q, but this is the negation of P. If the negation of P, then the negation of Q. Or in other words, not P implies not Q. And so it's the conditional statement, but we're negating everything. And then finally, we have the contrapositive, which you can see is like the negation of the converse. See, not Q implies not P. And so you will need to know these four. I'll just give you something and then say, right, the conditional, the converse, the inverse, and the contrapositive. I'll keep them in that order to make it easier. But then, but yeah, you need to know what they are. Okay. So this is like a sample problem. It says, let P be you are a guitar player and Q be you are a musician. Now, we kind of looked at this example yesterday. So this is really like a repeat for the conditional and converse. So let's take a look. If you are a guitar player, then you are a musician. Okay, so that's our conditional. If we had to say it's a true or false, that is true. If you're a guitar player, you play an instrument, which means you're a musician. Next, the converse would be if you are a musician. Then you are a guitar player. And this one is false. And we talked about that yesterday, that if you're a musician, you could play a variety of instruments. It doesn't have to be guitar. Now, the inverse, we'll do this so we can see the converse is in red, the conditional's in teal. Okay, so the inverse would be, remember, it's not P implies not Q. So they kind of tell us here, but I'm not going to give you that on a test. So we're going to say, if you are not a guitar player, then you are not a musician. Okay, so if you're not a guitar player, you could be playing something else. It doesn't mean that you're not a musician. So we're going to say that's false. And then finally, the contrapositive, we're going to put in that pink color, and that's the negation of the converse. So we would say, if you are not a musician, then you are not a guitar player. Well, that one is true. If you're not a musician, then you can't be a guitar player. Because if you're not a musician, that means you don't play an instrument. So I want you to notice the conditional and the converse are both true. I'm sorry, the conditional and the contrapositive are both true. And then the converse and inverse are both false. And so when everything's not true, like for a definition, we talked about the biconditional yesterday and everything was true. But if the converse is not also true, then you will notice this pattern. That is, the conditional and the contrapositive have the same truth value. They could both be false and the other two could be true. I'm just saying the conditional and the contrapositive have the same truth value. The converse and inverse have the same truth value. So next we're going to look at, move this up. We're going to practice some more. Here they don't tell us. We're going to have to do it. We're going to write the conditional, converse, inverse, and contrapositive, where P is the stars are visible and Q is it is night. So let's start with the conditional. If the stars are visible, and feel free to pause it and do it first, then it is night. All right, I went kind of far to the left. So I'm going to say true, okay? If the stars are visible, it has to be nighttime. The converse is if it is night, then the stars are visible. Well, just because it's nighttime doesn't mean we can always see the stars. It could be cloudy or something else, so I'm going to say false. Next we have the inverse. And the inverse would be if the stars are not visible, then it is not night. And just like the last one, well, if the stars are not visible, it doesn't mean it's not night. It could be clouds or something else. And then finally, the contrapositive would be if it is not night, then the stars are not visible. Well, if it's not night, we can't see the stars. And so that is true. So notice again that the conditional and the contrapositive are true. The converse and inverse are false. And that's it.